theorizes the whole system. But of course, the ideologist theorizes the whole system as an evil system, so that there's a value, a set of values built into the whole thing right at the start.
Well, now, would we reach in the Academy a collision point between the ideologist and the nihilist? It seems to me that the doctrine of academic freedom sometimes seems to be telling you that nothing is knowable. You get the relativism of people like John Dewey, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and they are really saying all ideas must start even in the race, because it is presumptuous for any professor to, for instance, say that there is more to be learned from studying the moral intimations of the Declaration of Independence than of the manifesto of Karl Marx. But now the people who object to that are insisting that among the responsibilities of the Academy is to forward a tradition and to secure the patrimony. So
yes, academic freedom certainly doesn't mean that all ideas are equal, because amongst one of the consequences of academic criticism is, of course, the discarding of a lot of ideas as being
yes, but John Stuart Mill said as long as anybody believes that they have not been satisfactorily discarded, then you can't say that they have been discarded, right?
No, and indeed, even if they're wrong, it's worth allowing them to be raised again, because the exercise of arguing against falsity strengthens the truth. John Milton
that's
took
a
the same
discipline.
view. That's a discipline.
That's a discipline, but Mill, as I remember, said you can't consider that a particular proposition has erred if anybody believes it to be true.
Yes, well, this is the skeptical ground
nihilist,
of freedom. Oh, now why nihilist? You see, the skeptical ground...
Because in point of fact, nothing can be thought to be untrue, because you can always find somebody who believes anything, can't you?
Oh, indeed. Descartes said that there is no absurdity such that you can't find one philosopher or another who has believed it. No, the real crux of academic freedom is, of course, that it's impossible to discover anybody whom you would want to trust who could declare this theory is true or that theory is unambiguously false. It's a recognition of the fact that, that a modern society consists of large numbers of people with rather different ideas about what's true and what's desirable.
Doesn't it?
Oh no, because you don't make that your criterion of truth. Your criterion of truth is logical, but your criterion of what can be said is that anybody wants to say it.
Well, Holmes would not have agreed with that. I mean, he said the test of truth is its ability to gain the sponsorship of the marketplace.
This is the judge, Oliver Wendell Holmes, is it? Or,
yes.
Yes. I wouldn't take my my doctrines about truth from a judge.
No, I certainly would not. But
they're not great epistemologists.
What I'm saying is that there's a nihilist strain that finds academic freedom a very useful ally, and that what you end up with is nescience. You cannot know anything.
But what you're saying is that academic freedom can be misused for bad purposes, and that's true, but I don't know what can't be misused for bad purposes. Everything can be used for bad purposes. The important thing, I think, is to clarify what academic freedom is and what its value is. Its value is probably, you see, there isn't now much difference between academic freedom and any other kind of freedom. 100 years ago, academic freedom was needed, for example, by lecturers in medical schools talking about the anatomy of sex, because if you said things that professors of medicine said outside a university, that they said inside a university, they'd have been run in for obscenity, so that you needed academic freedom in that way, because social conventions were much stricter. But now I don't know that there's any vast difference, is there, between the freedom of an academic and the freedom of any citizen. They say, and are free to say, exactly what they feel like saying.
Yes, but the point I'm trying to make is that one should object to a celebration of that part of academic freedom that conduces to nescience, even as one should not celebrate the fact that the First Amendment, malgré soi, permits decide, right?
Yes.
But there is a lot of, there is a high reliance on democracy and on academic freedom and other things that we tend to believe in order to push positions which are the opposite of ideology in that they say nothing can be believed. Intellectual anarchy, really, isn't it?
Ideology is quite inclined to take up these positions that nothing very much can be believed. I mean, for certain purposes, ideologies are curiously idealistic in spite of their realistic front. But that's a very complicated point. I would revert simply to saying that academic freedom, like anything else, can be misused, and I don't know how one would construct a foolproof version of academic freedom which would guarantee what's good in it and prevent villains and knaves and fools from misusing it. That's where the problem lies, of course. The further point is that a modern society like our own is a kind of bizarre adventure in which we move from generation to generation, loosening restraints which people in previous generations would have thought absolutely essential to maintaining a society. And at every loosening of restraint, somebody has said, it can't last, we shall fall apart. And so far, to an astonishing extent, and America is, of course, above all the laboratory of this, to an astonishing extent, the country has, you know, the society manages to survive and prosper. Now, we don't know how far this process can go, and I certainly sympathize with people who say, perhaps it's gone far enough, and we ought to be very cautious about restraints that we continue to loosen.
What comes primarily to mind is the idea of authority?
Yes, I think the idea of authority is absolutely essential to sustaining a modern society, because the only alternative is the idea of reason, and that simply introduces zealots and fanatics into the game, whereas the thing about authority is that a person with authority can say, you must do that because I have authority, which is not the same as saying, I'm infallible.
So in those, there need not be any internal assent in doing what the person in charge, whether he's a professor or a lieutenant,
that's exactly the point. Yes, you don't have to have internal assent. Obedience will do.
Well, let's turn to the examiner. Mr. Sobran, as I've said, is a senior editor of National Review and syndicated columnist, a graduate of Eastern Michigan University, who did graduate work there in English. His column is carried by Universal Press Syndicate. He's a commentator on CBS's Spectrum. Mr. Sobran.
Mr. Minogue, I enjoyed your book very much and learned a great deal from it. Bill's anecdote of Bernadette Devlin reminded me of another one that illustrates, I think, the interconnectedness of everything under the ideological view. I saw a headline in a radical feminist newspaper a few years ago that said, "Why the Nestle's boycott is a lesbian issue."
Now, I haven't told us why.
I forget, but it was pretty convincing. I understand you to be saying that that ideology is inherently subversive of any real social order. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, we have a case where ideology has come to power. We have a number of cases, but the Soviet Union is the main one, of course. The general presumption is that there's a certain cynicism among Soviet rulers that Mr. Gorbachev didn't get his new job by passing a civil service exam on the labor theory of value. But how totally cynical can they be? In what sense do they believe in their ideology, or is that the wrong category, belief?
That's a very difficult question to answer, and also, of course, a very interesting one. The point that I would want to make on it is that all ideologies, like Marxism, are forms of revolutionary praxis. The genius, Marx, is extremely clear on that. Therefore, their natural habitat is being persecuted and being used by some set of people who want absolute and total power to transform a society completely into something different. Now, they found themselves in the slightly unfortunate position of acquiring power in, of course, many cases in the 20th century from the Soviet Union onwards. And once they've acquired power, the results have, of course, been horrific, because you then begin to see what's involved in trying to create a homogeneous system. It means killing the people who don't fit, and therefore homicide on a colossal scale has normally followed this. And what results is usually a fixed elite. The nomenclatura in the Soviet Union, to a lesser extent the whole Communist Party itself, become a privileged class. And you get something which Marx and Marxists declare is impossible, namely one set of people with power simply dominate and exploit another set of people, and it has nothing to do with the mode of production. I mean, the way in which they produced cars or ball bearings in Magnitogorsk is exactly the same as the way in which they produce them in Detroit, more or less, give a certain amount of efficiency. So it becomes simply an exploitative system. People's capacity for belief is always remarkable. They can often have two contradictory beliefs, one of which they have on Sundays and the other of which they have in the middle of the week, etc. And I imagine that Russian Marxism is rather of that sort of Sunday Christianity kind that people have. On the other hand, as various studies of, say, the nomenclatura have made clear, a communist state is extremely precarious so long as there is a free world, because a communist state is in many ways construed as a prison. They have to put barbed wire and walls around to keep people from running off. And therefore it's unsafe so long as there is some place to move to. And therefore what will hold a communist state together will be the necessity of overthrowing non-communist states. If the world eventually became totally communist, I would expect the most horrendously nihilistic situation to arise, because it would simply be conflict between a set of simply ferocious, power-fascinated elites.
Yes, so you'd expect an ideology which flourishes best and most naturally in opposition to continue its opposition once in power, in a sense, i.e. by persecuting dissidents under the pretext that they are counter-revolutionary, and also by expanding, by aggressing against its neighbors. So isn't Soviet behavior inherent in the very formal structure of ideology?
Yes, I think that there's no doubt that in order to understand how, say, Marxists in power act, you have to take the ideology extremely seriously. I mean, people are very foolish who don't think ideas are important, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're carrying out their ideas. On the other hand, ideas of this universal kind are extremely dangerous to the people who hold them. You see, a lot of liberal feminism in the 19th and 20th centuries simply consists in taking seriously the unconsidered abstract remarks in, say, the Declaration of Independence and many other constitutions. Abstract formulae are a kind of time bomb which one of these days, generation by generation, may go past and nobody takes much notice of them, but then a generation arises that does. And quite a lot of dissidents in the Soviet Union are simply pure Marxists who have actually taken seriously the notion that it ought to be an egalitarian, proletarian state.
Well, might that not as well be said, say, of Christianity here and there in history, for instance, under the Borgias?
Yes.
Probably people who practiced the mandates of the Sermon on the Mount found themselves short-lived under the Borgias.
St. Francis was a very dangerous character, wasn't he? Because the Franciscans became the seedbed of lots of heresies, and the heresies all took this line of Jesus was a poor man, and here are the popes living in these palaces, and so on.
Yeah, but I suppose the critical difference between the two is that the injunctions of Christianity are immortally venerable, while those of communism are historically fallible and indeed have proved to be atrocious in execution, haven't they?
Well, the big difference, of course, is that Christianity has heaven and earth as imaginative realms within which to operate, whereas the first move in Marxism, if you want to intensify conflict in order to attain power, you have to remove that imaginative slack of heaven and say heaven is simply a fantasy. Everything is really about who gets what. And once you persuade people of that, you then have the hope of stirring up a vast amount of trouble. So that the denial of religion is the first premise of the ideological intensification of class conflict. Imminent, well, yes.
One of the fascinating insights in your book is your observation that though it purports to be scientific,